And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather map showing pretty strong low pulling into the southern Bering Sea here, so rather strong westerly winds will be blowing across the central Aleutians as the front weakens and moves northward, and a new low developing, bringing wind and rain into Kodiak Island. Otherwise, not too bad, improving conditions for the southeast coast. And for tomorrow, other than a few snow showers over the northern panhandle, it'll be generally dry with light winds and some clearing, especially down to the south. A lot of clearing over the eastern and northern part of the state. Still some flurry chances for the northern coast. This low center keeps a chance of snow across southern Alaska, rain and snow for the North Gulf Coast, but improving Kodiak Island, especially in the afternoon. This front bringing another round of snow into the southwest interior. And even a stronger low pulls into the Bering Sea on Tuesday, just west of the Pribilofs. Good gales and storm force winds here coming into the eastern Bering Sea and along the coast with that front. Snow and blowing snow also on the increase there. And that'll extend down to the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. Coastal water forecast. South coast of the Panhandle, north winds 15 knots for the day Monday. And the central coast, north to northwest, 10 to 15 knots. East 10 to 15 for the north coast. Lynn Canal, light northeast winds at 10 knots. Same thing for Stevens Passage. And Clarence Strait, north winds at 10 knots. And for Tuesday, we've got southeast winds 15 knots for Clarence Strait, north at 15 for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal with seas 2 to 3 feet. And for the south coast, light winds out of the north at 10 knots. Central coast, not too bad, northeasterlies at 15. And the north coast, north to northeast, 10 to 15 knots for Tuesday. Cook Inlet, tomorrow, northern Cook Inlet, northeast at 15, but small craft advisories, southern Cook Inlet for northeast winds at 30 knots. East 30 knots there for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. North Gulf Coast, east winds 20 knots and 15 knot easterlies for Prince William Sound. For Tuesday, in the Sound, look for variable winds, light variable wind conditions, 10 knots with seas down to 2 feet. Also the North Gulf Coast, light variable winds at about 10 knots. East 15 for the Barren Islands, northeast 20 for Kamishak Bay. And southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, northeast 25, much lighter north of the Forelands. And Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds, 25 knots for Monday, south at 20 for Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, stronger winds coming in with that front. Gales out of the south and southwest, 35 to 40 knots. And for Tuesday, south to southeast winds, 30 to 35 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Gale warnings, Bristol Bay, southeast at 35 knots, and Kodiak Island looking at south winds at 20 knots. For the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, southwest winds, or south to southwest winds at 40 to 45 knots. Storm warnings for Adak and Atka, southwest winds 50 knots, and then north to west winds out over the western Aleutians 30 to 45 knots. And for Tuesday, we've got on Alaska Island looking at south winds at 40 knots, Adak and Atka, southwest 35 to 40 knot winds. And then for the western Aleutians, northwest to southwest winds at, 32 or 25 to 30 knots. And for the Pribilofs tomorrow, good gales, just under storm force at 45 knots from the south. Northeast 35 knots for St. Matthew Island. East winds 25 knots for the southwest coast, northeast of 25 for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. And for the day Tuesday, 20 knots out of the east for St. Lawrence Island. Gale warnings here, south of Nunivak Island along the southwest coast, southeast winds 35 knots, and brisk wind advisories for the Yukon Delta coast, southeast 25 there. Gale warnings, St. Matthew Island, east winds 35 knots, south at 40 for the Pribilofs. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, east winds 20 knots for the western Arctic coast, about 15 knots for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for Tuesday, pretty light winds now. Easterlies 10 to 15 knots for the central and eastern Arctic coast. And the west side there, west at about 20. Otherwise, east, northeast winds 15 to 25 knots for the Chukchi Sea.